Report of Carla, a night nurse at a hospital in the interior of São Paulo. Room 304 has always been quiet during the day, but at night it was different. Carla had 8 years of nursing experience, but she had never felt so uncomfortable as she did in that ward of the hospital. Room 304 had been the bed of Dona Marta, an elderly woman who was fighting terminal cancer. For weeks, Carla took care of her, talked, held her hand in the worst moments. Dona Marta passed away on a cold July night. After that, the room was closed for a few days until it received another patient. And that's when things started. The first sign was the call button. He fired alone, without anyone pressing. Carla would go to her room and find everything normal. She arrived and felt an intense cold, as if she had entered a freezer. The new patient said he heard someone call his name during the night. Carla. Whispers that seemed to come from the bathroom. She thought he was dreaming or delusional because of the medication. On one of those nights, when she was reviewing the medical records at the nursing station, she heard a noise, the sound of the IV stand hitting something. She got up and saw, through the security camera, that the door to room 304 had opened by itself. When he went there, he found the serum dripping on the floor as if someone had pulled the needle out of the vein. But the patient was sleeping peacefully. The worst happened 2 weeks later. Room 304 became vacant again. During the night shift, Carla passed by the corridor and heard a laugh. It wasn't a loud laugh. She was short, hoarse, inhuman. When she opened the door of 304, she saw what she could never forget. In the armchair where Dona Marta used to sit, there was a figure lying down, covered with the sheet. When I pulled it, there was no one. Carla asked to be transferred to another wing the following month, but she says that to this day, she avoids going near that room. 2. The child in the corridor, the boy who played alone. Report of Bianca, a pediatric nurse at a hospital in Rio de Janeiro. Hospital where Bianca worked had a deactivated wing. It was an old isolation sector, closed after a renovation. No one passed by, but sometimes during the night, someone heard child footsteps running in that corridor. The security cameras showed nothing, but the sounds were there. Bianca did not believe these stories until that early morning. She was at the nursing station when she saw, out of the corner of her eye, a figure passing by. He thought he was one of the little patients who had left the room without permission. She got up to continue, worried, and saw a child of about 6 years old standing at the end of the disabled corridor. He wore striped pajamas and held a teddy bear. Bianca called, "Hi, honey. Are you lost? Come here with your aunt." The boy did not answer. He just turned around and entered one of the empty rooms. She ran after it, but when she entered, the room was completely empty. There was no open window, no secret door, nothing. A few nights later, a desperate mother showed up at the hospital, swearing she had seen her son, who had passed away a year ago, playing near the main entrance. She described exactly the pajamas and teddy bear that Bianca had seen that night. The hospital staff avoided commenting, but some said that the old sector had received terminally ill children. Many died there without ever receiving visitors. and perhaps some were still waiting for company. Report of Eduardo, an ICU nurse at a hospital in Belo Horizonte. In the ICU, death was almost routine, but in bed 7, there was something different. Eduardo was skeptical. I like to think that everything had a logical explanation, until that night. It was a quiet shift, and the patient in bed 7, Mr. João, seemed stable. But on the monitor, Eduardo noticed that his heart rate suddenly skyrocketed. She ran to the bed and saw Mr. John trying to scream, his eyes wide with pure terror. He tried to pull his legs up, as if something was grabbing him. Eduardo asked what was happening, but the man could only point down. When Eduardo lifted the sheet to look, he felt something touch his hand. It was cold, chilled, like meat submerged in ice. He pulled his hand back, startled. Mr. João died that night without apparent cause. The exams were normal, but he died with that expression of frozen terror on his face. After that, other patients reported feeling hands pulling their feet on the bed 7. Some said they heard whispers, "Come down here with me." A nursing assistant swore he saw pale fingers sticking out from under the bed before resigning. Today, bed 7 no longer exists. It has been removed. In its place, they put a closet, but some still say they hear knocks coming from within him. Report of Helena, a nurse at a historic hospital in Salvador. The hospital was old, more than 100 years old. It was rumored to have been a sanatorium in the past. Helena knew these stories, but never gave it importance, until he saw the black veil nurse. He was a tall, slender figure dressed in a period uniform. The cap covered much of her face, and she wore a black veil that hid her eyes. Some said that it appeared to those who were about to die. One morning, Helena was applying medication on the floor of prolonged hospitalization. When she entered Mr. Alfredo's room, she noticed that he was restless. He said that he had received a visit from another nurse. "She gave me the last shot," he said, but Helena assured that there was no one there but her in that ward. The next morning, Alfredo was found dead, lying on his side, with his arms stretched out as if he had received an injection. The stranger, there were no needle marks, but in the medical record, an application of medication at 3:45 a.m. was noted, a time that Helena never recorded. Other patients reported seeing the woman in the black veil entering the rooms, and whenever she appeared, someone did not survive until dawn. Helena resigned weeks later. She says that on the last night, she saw the black veil nurse looking at her through the reflection of the glass. And he swore that behind the veil there was a smile. Report of Renata, a nurse on the night shift at a public hospital in southern Brazil. For many people, hospitals are places of hope, where life is renewed. But those who work at night know that in the shadows of the cold corridors, sometimes something remains, something that shouldn't be here. Renata has always been a practical nurse. He did not believe in urban legends or ghost stories. I had heard from colleagues about figures and whispers in the early mornings, but I thought it was fatigue playing tricks. That night was one of the quietest she had ever faced. The clock read Euro 15. The absolute silence in the medical clinic wing was interrupted only by the sound of machines monitoring vital signs. 3 stable patients, no occurrence recorded. It was all too calm. She was walking slowly, jotting down routine observations on her clipboard, when she felt a draft of cold air run down the back of her neck. Strange, he thought. There was no open window on that floor. The central air conditioning was turned off for maintenance. At the end of the hallway, she noticed that a light was on in one of the bedrooms, specifically in bedroom 12, bed number 2. She frowned. That bed had been vacant for days, awaiting maintenance. He approached with firm steps, although he felt a growing discomfort in his chest. Something wasn't right. When he reached the door, he stopped. Inside, someone was sitting on the bed. He was motionless, with his back to the door. The body bent slightly forward, rocking back and forth in a constant, almost hypnotic movement. Her chin seemed to touch her chest, as if she were crying or laughing softly. Renata took a deep breath. "Good evening, sir. Is everything okay?" "How did you get here?" he asked, without getting an answer. She took 2 steps inside. The smell in the environment was different. There was an odor of dampness, as if someone had just come out of a lake. The tiled floor was wet with small puddles leading up to the bed. Renata swallowed. He checked the patient chart. No new moves. "I need to know your name so I can help you." Her voice sounded firmer than she really felt. Then, slowly, he turned his face. What she saw was not something that the human mind was prepared to comprehend without breaking a little. The eyes. There were no eyes. Just 2 dark holes, deep, like bottomless pits. His skin seemed swollen, with the shade of someone who had been submerged in cold water for hours. From the corner of his mouth flowed something that looked like a mixture of mud and coagulated blood. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out, just a gurgling sigh, and then he held out his hand. Renata took a step back, paralyzed. His fingers were too long, with crooked joints and brittle nails. But there was something familiar about that hand, and that's when she realized, it can't be. She murmured, her breathing quick. She recognized the hospital bracelet on her pale wrist. It belonged to a patient who had died there, a young boy, rescued from drowning in Lago das Pedras weeks ago. He had been revived after 20 minutes submerged. The miracle was short-lived. He died a few hours later, right in that bed. Renata felt the ground slip from under her feet. The man, or what was left of him, whispered something now audible. "Help me!" The voice was hoarse, like a muffled scream underwater. She quickly retreated, slamming her back against the wall of the hallway. He ran, without looking back, to the security room. Sound of door opening in a hurry, hurried footsteps. The security guard, Jorge, accompanied Renata back to the room, not understanding what was happening. When they entered together, there was nothing. The floor was dry, the bed made. There was no sign of an unexpected visitor. But Renata knew what she had seen. The next day, he decided to research the old records with the administration team. He discovered that in that same bed, 2 other patients had died without explanation after showing signs of drowning, even without having any connection with water. It was said that that room had been in the past one of the places where bodies were washed, and that something refused to leave that space. On Renata's last night on duty in that ward, she decided to face her fear. He returned to room 12 with a glass of holy water that he had obtained from one of the Catholic assistants in the hospital. Alone, she entered the room, taking a deep breath. Whatever it is, you need to leave. He said, pouring the water at the foot of bed number 2. At that moment, the light flickered. The monitors turned off by themselves, and on the window glass, Renata saw his image reflected. Behind Delacom, the outstretched hand. She closed her eyes and, when she opened it again, she was alone. But the mark of a pale hand was imprinted on the glass. Renata asked for a transfer the next day. And she says to this day that she still feels sometimes the same current of cold air passing behind her, even at home. In the silent corridors of hospitals, they say that not all patients can find their way out. Some are trapped in the last place where they were seen alive. And you, would you dare to do a shift alone after this? Imagine passing by bed number 2 in room 12 and seeing someone sitting, waiting for you. Leave your like if this story gave you goosebumps. And tell us in the comments if you know anyone who has been through something similar. If you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Here, fear has no time to arrive.